Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. This morning we are focusing on developments across the Horn of Africa, given the current developments which are around security, defense relations, and also the crisis in Sudan. With me in studio this morning is Ahmed Hashi, who is a diplomacy and foreign affairs commentator. Also in his company, Dr. Hassan Kanenje, the director, Horn Institute for Strategic Studies. Good morning, gentlemen. Good and morning. Also Professor Noah Medamba, defense and foreign policy expert, as well as a senior associate at the Global Center for Policy Studies. Your time is all appreciated, gentlemen, and thank you.
Good morning.
Asante. Let's begin with what's happening in the Horn of Africa. According to recent developments, already volatile region characterized by instability is experiencing what could potentially risk further destabilization. With the drawdown of the African Union transition mission in Somalia ongoing, Egypt and Somalia have signed a military agreement that will see Cairo deploy 5,000 troops in a new-look peacekeeping mission post-ATMIS. The move has angered Ethiopia, which neighbors Somalia and makes up countries whose troops are serving in Somalia under ATMIS, terming the Mogadishu-Cairo deal as a threat to its existence, saying it will not stand idle while other actors take measures to destabilize the region. In the last 24 hours, the government in Addis also responded to a letter by Egypt to the UN Security Council, saying its developments are in line with the UN Charter on Developments and will not stop in its pursuit for socio-economic growth. At the start of the year, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed signed a controversial port deal with the breakaway region of Somaliland, a move that angered Mogadishu, prompting a military deal that saw Somalia sign an agreement with Egypt in a deal that Abiy said will lease a 20-kilometer portion in exchange for recognition of Somaliland, a move that angered the federal authority in Mogadishu. That will be what our discussion will center around, gentlemen, and many thanks for your presence here. Again, Ahmed, what do you make of all these developments, given the already volatility in the region that risks further destabilization? And what does this mean happening at the doorstep of Kenya?
I think the core problem of Somalia's political economy, Ayub, is secessionism. Once the protagonists of the political class, and the political class in Somalia is not the political class that used to be there. Most of them are outside the country. Once there is a diktat about breaking up a nation state, then the process of creating a peaceful political settlement becomes really dark. And other nation states are going to want to take care or take advantage of what is happening inside Somalia. So the main protagonist today, Ayub, and this tells you how weak our foreign policy department here in Kenya is, and how, and they're not adroit. Kenya is supposed to be the anchor state in this region. Somalia, Ethiopia, and this region, Kenya has a foundational role to play. Middle East states, like the Gulf countries of the United Arab Emirates and all these other countries, Ayub, have caused bedlam in our region. Now, it is absolutely against every principle of international law, of the African Union, of the IGAD, of nation states, and any decent law, that some political leader takes a piece of land that is sovereign and wants to add it to another country and say, this is yours and you can do as you please. Particularly because the Somali people are chafing under the division of their nation into 5 parts historically. Djibouti, Western Somalia, the NFD, and now what used to be called British Somaliland back in the day of colonialism. Now, I think that this is not in the interest of the international community. We have to put Humpty Dumpty back together, no matter what the cost is. Anybody claiming that secessionism is going to help the Somali people just doesn't understand the dynamics of the clans and their history. And about Ayub, I beg your pardon, the problem is that today we have an imbalance of the major clans within the Somali Republic because of the failure of leadership in Mogadishu and secessionism in the north, and the whole idea of having a federal state or a federal system in Somalia is actually just probably the most obtuse form of policy I have come across. Secondly, Egypt is just taking advantage of our region. Egypt has no business coming down here and causing problems. We as East Africans can solve these problems on our own. I think that the dam in the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, which is something that we are all very proud of, and we hope that the Kenya government connects to it so that our electricity problems can go yonder, is something that the Egyptians are scared totally about. In Professor Midamba's area in Nyanza, they have 30 to 40 Egyptians who go every morning to Lake Nyanza and dip their to check where the level of the water is. The bread that the Egyptians eat is connected to that Nile. There will be no oil wars. The wars of today is about water. Thirdly and lastly is I think that Ethiopia's political leadership has collapsed. I mean, the very fabric of Ethiopian society is opening up. We know that the Fano of the Amhara region is maybe 100 kilometers away from Addis Ababa. Mr. Abiy is playing the rhetoric of nationalism that has very deep roots inside Ethiopia, which in the same vocabulary as the late Haile Selassie, who believed that Ethiopia extended up to Moyale here in Lamu, and that the Somali people were part of his subjects. Now, until that atypical idea is overthrown and toppled, and the Ethiopian state and its people learn to live within the country that they have, we're going to have war clouds on the horizon, and I predict that there's going to be a military conflict in the Horn, and the government of Kenya and its Ministry of Foreign Affairs is sleeping on the job.
Okay, Dr. Kanenje, coming to you. A lot in the mix-up because the Egyptians more or less see the Jihad as an existential threat because they say it affects their agriculture, and then prompting the military deal. Is it in a way also taking advantage of the nature of Somalia itself, given institutions that still are not as functional as they ought to be because of the civil war, and a military power here, which is the second biggest beneficiary after Israel from the United States, largely appearing to be funding or taking part of a conflict, and in a region that is largely unstable because of other actors that have been destabilizing it?
Just perhaps to correct something, second largest beneficiary, you mean
military aid?
Military aid, and I think, because listeners might not really have the background, but this goes back to Camp David in 1978, accords that guaranteed certain military assistance, to both countries, even though the general assistance to Israel is probably 20 times more than
much bigger,
to Egypt. Now, I think that the number of things that, we should not really, conflict. You have, one, the general state of dysfunction in the Horn that allows not just Egypt or Cairo, but virtually everybody to actually try to stake a claim, and, intervene and have a free reign in parts of the Horn of Africa, in part because of the challenges we're facing in terms of security, in terms of economics, in terms of just being able to actually have a cohesive, governance, structure. Second, it has to do with the Great Renaissance, dam. The Nile is really critical to Egypt's survival. That goes without question. There is no Egypt without the Nile. But there is Nile without Egypt, you see. Now there's a difference. Now, one thing that sometimes I think we shy away from, and Egypt is a country that is friendly to Kenya, as well as Ethiopia, and is an important player on the continent, is part of the founding of the Organization of African Unity, that later on, remember the days of Gamal Abdel Nasser and stuff. But there is a sense, especially countries that have a stake in the Nile, that the 1929 and 1959 treaties really did not factor in the interests of the countries, such as Ethiopia, as well as the rest that have a stake in it. And Ethiopia, I think Addis sought to try and correct that, in part because a lot of water of the Nile comes also from Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is a country with 120 million people, but only 45% electrified, compared to Egypt, which is almost 100% now, today as we speak. And because energy is very critical to economics, Addis looked at it as this is an opportunity for us to actually make a difference. And someone has to give it to Addis for literally raising money, sourcing locally to build the dam, $5 billion.
And that's since 2011.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's a very nationalistic kind of project. So it is not something that Addis is likely to give up. Now, the disagreement has been the number of years they're supposed to take in terms of filling the dam.
The water.
It's not about using or building the Great Renaissance Dam itself. So there has been a disagreement over that, and that has created the kind of fissures you see between Cairo and Addis Ababa. Now, seeing the dynamics of the region as well as the dynamics of the Red Sea, it is very convenient for Cairo, to seek to exploit, some of these tensions that are existing from a very, I would say, nationalistic, self-interest, kind of, to do that. It's doing this for the first time, for instance, in Somalia in 50 years, probably almost since independence. This is not something that has happened, in recent years. But it is a trend that has actually been, happening as Cairo has been moving to deepen its engagements with own countries. It's not just, it's only that now they're sending military and probably assets, or they're willing to do that. But the engagements with countries in Eastern Africa has actually been expanded, in recent years. And so, yes, one has to do with the chaos in our region, which are being exploited. Two, it has to do with the strategic interest of Egypt, especially in relation to the use of the waters of the Nile.
Okay, yes, Professor Mdamba, given all these circumstances and the military deal then thereafter, which had raised concerns in Addis Ababa, issuing a communique saying that this is unwelcome given the circumstances it cited. But how does it address the question of Somaliland as well? Because the federal authority in Mogadishu says that is an aggression on its sovereign territorial integrity, yet Ethiopia is still forging ahead with that in a deal, according to what they signed between Abiy and Musa Bihi, that will last for 50 years for Ethiopia to access the sea, as Dr. pointed out, to cater for the needs of its 120 million people or thereabout. I mean, how will all this fit into that one basket, given the complexity of the region that we live in?
Thank you, Ayub. First, I want to thank you for having us in this wonderful studio. I think a very innovative program in the country. We are very pleased to be here. Allow me to come to this from a global perspective, and then you will understand where I'm coming from. There is flashpoint, world flashpoint. Ukraine, Russia, the Middle East, the Southeast Asia, China, and the US. This flashpoint pulled together is enough to kill the world the way we know it. Now, let me tell you, a study done by University of South in London just came up with a really profound finding, which is right now the U.S. has ability to kill all the Russian nuclear launching sites. There are about 150 of them. There are about 70 launching sites in China, and maybe 1 or 2 in North Korea. They can kill them within 45 minutes with conventional weapon, not nuclear weapon. Now, when that is done, then it leaves the U.S. as the only power in the world which can do whatever they want. So all this rhetoric of using what you call nuclear that Putin has been talking about will not work. But now, coming to Africa, Africa is the largest island that there is in the world. We are surrounded by large water, body of water, Atlantic, Pacific, Mediterranean, Indian Ocean, and Africa is right here in the middle. So what you will think about is Africans will sit down and look at, after we've gone through terrible colonial war and continue upheaval in the continent, you will think that Africans will sit down together and strategize on how to defend this big island, how to utilize the natural resources that we have in order for us to develop as a continent. Forget about all these things. We are supposed to be under AU, okay? Look at the founding fathers that my friend here talked about. Jamal Abdel Nasser was one of the founding fathers. Nkrumah was one of the founding fathers. And all these people, their vision was to unite Africa. And therefore, at this point, Egypt has the largest army, the fourth, by the way, in the world. What is that army doing? They're not just sitting duck and acquiring incredible expenses. We ought to be able to have a common command in Africa, such that Egyptian military and Egyptian resources can be utilized anywhere in Africa. And also the South African Navy can also be utilized anywhere in Africa. We have regions. We have the East Africa region. But they, instead of getting into a war and destroy the Renaissance Dam, which is going to supply energy, water and energy to all the area, including Egypt, including Sudan, including Kenya, and all other countries together. Instead of destroying that, we need to utilize and hence more, develop more, so that we can provide livelihood in Africa. We face several challenges that I'd like to outline, and this impacts Somalia as well as Egypt, everybody. We have incredible environmental issue right now, which is impacting the entire area. Sahel, arbitrary border, which was created by colonial. But colonials are gone over 60 years. They're no longer here. And then we have inept political leadership all over Africa. Then we have negative effect of external debt, huge for most of the country. And lastly, governance. So unless we put all this together as a team, as Africa, and then create a high command so that there is a level where military need to serve, there is a level where Navy, there is a level where Air Force need to serve. We cannot move anywhere. We'll kill each other.
Ahmed, how can the tension then be diffused, given that the internal dynamics in Ethiopia also is somewhat having an effect on what's happening in the region and the growing opposition to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who in the aftermath of coming to power in 2018 an ethnic Oromo who had decried systematic state exclusion from the center when the TPLF were in power, and therefore, according to a majority of Ethiopians, failing to live by the very book and the very reforms that he promised to bring in, but fell out with the TPLF. There was a war in Tigray. Yep. Now internal dynamics, you mentioned the Oromo movement and what's happening in Somalia at the moment. How can this then be diffused? And how should Kenya also pay attention to all these developments, given the neutral status it always assumes, and how former President Uhuru Kenyatta midwifed the talks between the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government, the federal government, and the TPLF, the South Africa talks, the Nairobi talks, which more or less led to ending of the war. I mean, is Kenya keen on what's happening, and how can the tension be diffused?
Ayub, in his great novel, the West African writer Usman Semben, Allah Yarham, in his book, I think it's called God's Bits of Woods. I don't know if they teach that anymore in secondary school. We used to study these things. Said, you know, the great there might be hunger and there might be thirst, but the great misfortune is not knowing who wants you to be hungry and thirsty. And I think that Mr. Abiy is probably one of the great mistakes of Ethiopian political economy. And the reason I say this is that he came in a wave of such optimism that the entire Ethiopian nation was just clapping for that man. He didn't even walk around with security. He would wear a kitenge shirt. It was a breath of fresh air. Nobody had seen a 40-something-year-old young man take power in one of the most complex societies in Africa. There's over 2,000 tribes in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. Ethiopia, you know, was named by the Greeks, the land of burnt faces. That's what it means, Ethiop. It's a Greek word. That's how ancient Ethiopia is. Every person in Ethiopia thought that Prime Minister Abiy, including myself, was a great supporter at the beginning. Even though I kept on warning that the political economy and, as you remember, that the structures underneath Abiy would not allow for him to make those kinds of reform, because Ethiopia has been basically a state governed by the two ethnic groups in northern Ethiopia, which have been the Tigray and the Amhara. Mm-hmm. And within those two groups, there is this concept of a local empire. Remember, Ethiopia was the only country that participated in the Berlin Conference. Mm-hmm. And one of the concepts of empire that the Ethiopians have always believed in is to have a nation state that stretches from up there in the mountains all the way down to Lamu, including Moyale and all these other places. So the very idea of Ethiopia is if I can use as a threat to her neighbor's national sovereignty. I believe that. And I think Somalia shared the same kind of thinking. Now, the realities on the ground are very different. The internal combustion in Ethiopia, Ayub, is going to make Ethiopia a failed state before the end of this year or early next year. And this is about 200 million people in that country. You can imagine the kind of catastrophe that would cause for Africa. Ethiopia is the heart of Africa. Mm. If it stops beating, the entire provisional experiment that we in this continent want, that you can have a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, open market, mm-hmm. plural system with a free press, with a free system of voting. All these ideas that we want to bring, and this new generation wants, yeah. If Ethiopia collapses under the weight of the past, it will mean that the experiment that we in every country in Africa will be under threat. Secondly, I think Ethiopia has no business looking for territory in Somalia. They already swallowed the third largest region with Ethiopia, mm-hmm. with 25 million Somalis. There's no business looking for more territory to swallow. It's absolutely not. And that will cause a terrible war. The Somalis are about 10,000 years old. They've lived as a neighbor to Ethiopia. They have fought great battles. The last one being the 1977 one. And I think that Ethiopia is wrong to take territory from the Somali country and say that we are going to put a military base here and we're going to put a navy here, and Eritrea is already up in arms. Eritrea has already warned Djibouti, told them that if you give them any territory, there's going to be a state of war. Lastly, Ayub, I want to make one very, very critical point. We have to fix Somalia, the Somali Republic. We have to fix it. Kenya is not an honest broker in Somalia, nor is Ethiopia. The great Kofi Annan said that if you want peace in a country, you do not bring your neighbors to come inside who have a vested interest.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Kananja, when we get back from the break, we'll explore that question further, and in what the American scholar, Professor Rashid Khalidi, paints Washington as a broker of deceit in the Palestine-Israel conflict. And it made up a large portion of the debate we just ended between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in Pennsylvania, one of the swing states ahead of the elections. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. We are back with Ahmed, Dr. Kananja, and Professor Midamba after the break here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.